Hello. Mhm. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you all.
If you want to see people on the other page, please look. A feast.
I hope everyone's doing well. Had good weekends. And yeah, we're looking forward to sitting together for a little while. So let's just get started. Mm. So finding a relatively comfortable seated position that we'll stay in for a little while. Not wanting to be strained or tense in your posture. Wanting it to be relaxed and settled so that the energy can be used more towards observation rather than control. But of course, it does take some energy to sit upright, to keep a sense of energized quality to the posture. Trying to just put as much energy into the seated posture as is necessary. Concerned more with the mind that's in relationship to the body, trying to understand, letting your eyes come to close. The invitation is to start to turn into a more receptive quality of the attention, not reaching out, responsible for tasks and things outside and around us, but we settle into just receiving the sensory experiences that this life is subject to. So we notice sound, hearing, seeing that we don't have to go reach out for it. Don't need to control sounds that are coming and going. But that sensitivity at the ears is receiving the vibrations from the world around us in the air. We see how quickly the mind interprets these sounds, these tones, textures, to what it believes it's hearing. And then we start to create a sense of the world around us. Car, an airplane, wind. A natural process of our existence, but one we can start to shift towards just that receiving aspect. Sounds arising and passing. We don't need to make anything of them, construct anything of them. Interpret them, defend our preference. All of that at times can be let go of. There's just the hearing and the knowing of the hearing. And really, this can be enough. The practice doesn't need to be more complicated. Noticing phenomena arise and pass, change as conditions change. Watching the heart, mind grab onto, reject. Watching the mind investigate, let go. Just staying connected to the stream of sound and appreciating what it has to teach us about the nature of phenomena, its impermanence, its uncontrollable quality. Its non-self nature. Hearing consciousness arising and passing moment by moment. But of course, other phenomena will arise. We bring the same approach. Concentration, mindfulness, curiosity, courage to receive phenomena at other sense stores, like the body. All these sensations happening throughout the body. Pressure, tingling, tension, hardness, softness, coolness, warmth, moisture, dryness. Sensations that would be hard to describe with words. Just like listening with the body. These phenomena arise, they pass away. Physicality, physical sensations, body consciousness arises. Sensations and our awareness of them. Arising and passing. All of the phenomena impermanent, undependable, uncontrollable. No need for a me at the center. No center at all in time or in space. The mind will try to locate itself, claim a self, a time and a place, a trajectory, passing backwards of where we came from and forward where we're going, conjures the world around us, our views, our worries, our wants. This is a time where we can let that preoccupation of the mind rest, releasing from the past and the future, releasing from elsewhere. Our only responsibility right now to receive this moment of body, sound, consciousness, knowing it, letting it go. And narrow into the breath if that's helpful. The rising and falling around the area of the abdomen. Not putting pressure, not straining the attention. Just letting everything else go. Just observing whatever we notice in whatever size field we decide to observe. The breath at the abdomen, the hands, the whole body seated, or sound. Other things will arise. You can let them pass. Unhook ourselves from all of the rest for a little while. Try to understand more fully this experience of body and mind, sensory experience and consciousness, coming and going, unfolding moment by moment. So Michelle and I thought we would take some time for questions again this week if anyone had any about your practice, instructions, anything we might be able to help you with. If you have a question, the best way to let us know is in the chat, or sorry, in the bottom of the page. There's a little react button, and there you should see one that says raise hand. So you can see you have a question, click on raise hand, or if that is complicated, you can type into the chat that you have a question, or sometimes we'll just see you if you raise your hands physically. Hi, Samantha. Do you have a question?
I have many. That was fun. It's a very can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep, yep.
Um it's kind of like a thinking question, a wisdom question, I guess, understanding. Just about the thing we're kind of supposed to be doing as we practice, accepting karma unfolding as you will. How does acceptance happen when there is no understanding of it? I don't know if that makes sense, but in my experience in practice, sometimes a very hard to accept karma or event or experience, be it small, medium, or large. Sometimes dissipates without me understanding how, and I call that the mystery of the practice, and I just welcome and happy with that. Other times there is an understanding, like, oh, okay, like that, like lightning, and even though it may not make sense in my personal worldview, but it's very freeing and peaceful, and so I welcome that. But how does that work? How does understanding happen if you don't understand it? Do you understand?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a great question. Yeah. Michelle, I could start, but I could go if you, Michelle, if you want to jump in.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, Samantha, it's a really good question. On a bunch of, or it's really like different, it's different questions, and I think it's like an interesting range of things to consider. In part, I would just start because I know Michelle will have things to say too with I think what we mean by acceptance can mean a few different things. What we mean by understanding can mean a few different things, and that there are different ways in which those can play out, in ways that feel similar, in ways that feel different, um, where there's resistance but understanding, or no understanding but still no resistance. I mean, these are so the question of acceptance, right? And sometimes we have to, we often want to try to kind of be careful with the language of that, of, things happen to us or things happen in the world, and the that quality of equanimity that we sometimes talk about in terms of uh, a mechanism of acceptance of these things has really to do with the acceptance of the truth of it, right? That this has happened, and that it has happened because of conditions and because of understandable, whether we understand each moment of it or not, it's understandable why this, you can see why this kind of thing happened or why this type of thing happens. And it doesn't mean we're condoning it. It doesn't mean we don't care. It doesn't mean we're not upset, or that we, this sense of, you have to be careful when you're saying accepting. It's like, well, it's just the way it is. If there's, if you see things that are, unskillful or immoral, or, it doesn't mean that we're not involved in a moral relationship with the world or with our own lives, or with, our communities and our families. But that there is something about accepting the truth that something happens, that people behave in a certain way, or we behaved in a certain way, or, something happened. And we see that the resistance to the truth of it is a cause of suffering and not helpful. And that acceptance of the fact that this has happened allows us to actually be in honest relationship with it and how we move forward, etc. Right? So just that, first of all, it's that carefulness with, like, what do we mean by acceptance? It doesn't mean we're condoning, but it means that we are not arguing with the fact of it, and we're not resisting the fact of it. And by accepting the truth of something, we then are in a fuller process of how we relate to it, emotionally or practically, etc. And then that piece of understanding. I mean, I think it's really a good point of, like, you can mean that, and, like, we come to you're pointing at, like, that the deepest acceptance, right? The deepest equanimity comes from the most profound understanding. And so that there is a way in the tradition, in our practice, that these things are tied together. That it's like through the understanding that all phenomena are impermanent, that they're subject to transformation outside of our control, that they're not a self, right? That through the understanding, we'll just say, of that, right? That the arising and passing, the conditioned nature of all this phenomena, that we stop having expectations that it's going to be satisfying, and we accept that there's satisfactory and unsatisfactory experiences coming and going, right? So it's that sense of, like, through understanding, which happens through just observing, watching things arise and pass, we come to understand this is the nature of all things. And through that, we come to a deeper acceptance of, this is life, this is the nature of all phenomena, and that the mind is undisturbed by the fact of that. So you're right that there is, like, a mechanism there linked into, like, acceptance comes from understanding, right? But that there are things that we don't understand in terms of behavior, in terms of how someone could do this, or why this is happening in the world, or etc., right? That there's some part of us that I think we have to be careful. Is it that we don't understand it really, or that we just don't like it, right? I mean, I think that we have, like, to differentiate there of, like, what's really happening. But let's just say it is about, like, we actually don't understand what happened. Can we accept it even if we don't understand it? And I would say yes, there still is an ability to, on maybe it's not the most profound level of equanimity, but there is a sense of, like, we don't really know what just happened, but this has happened, and there's a process of acceptance that can unfold even without the understanding. But we're talking about different degrees and to some degree maybe different kinds of understanding and different kinds of acceptance, that we're talking about. Does that feel like it
Yeah,
resonates?
of course. Thank you.
Michelle, anything you want to add?
Maybe just I can add two things, which is in the deepest equanimity, acceptance is unconditional. And so, for example, when we talk about loving kindness, we're talking about love infused with wisdom, not just any kind of love, it's an unconditional love. And so these terms that we can use, acceptance is very different than unconditional acceptance. Without conditions, without conditions, without conditions, which would include, I think, our normal kind of understanding of the word understanding. And so Jesse really did cover it all in terms, I'm just kind of taking a different angle into it, which is a lot of the practice is deconstructing who we think we are, right? So like that it's a momentary, moment to moment understanding. And so if we think I am my body or you are your body or we are our body, then a lack of understanding of that would bring about a lack of understanding, right? So if there's a kind of physical pain that we're not accepting, it's often because we're not understanding that it's fire element or fire and air, or right, like that it's or someone else's, that we're not maybe penetrating the depth of the reality of what's happening. So for example, there might be behavior that's happening that we don't see that it's motivated by fear. And so we might lack understanding of why. When we say why, we're not penetrating what might be motivating it, which might prevent the unconditional acceptance. So that when Jesse's talking about the truth would be in that case that we understand that somebody's behavior was motivated by fear. We understand it. We don't get involved in the content of the thinking of it so much, or the story, as much as we know that I am not my emotion. I am not my thoughts. I am not my body. You are not your thoughts. You are not your body. That's understanding. So any other kind of embellishment or interpretation of the understanding is not what is meant by understanding in this context. And understanding the context is everything Jesse explained. And then, it's vast. It's so vast. It's but when you distill equanimity down to the deepest place, it's really that we understand that equanimity is without conditions.
And so that's where I get confused when you say everything's conditional, even like fire, even if, but then unconditional equanimity, or I mean unconditional metta, isn't that conditional too? And really that's my brain thinking.
Well, what do you mean by that? Because like if it's very hot, for example, right now where I am, it's so hot, I almost feel like I might pass out. It's so hot, right? And so, but I understand that it's fire element, and that I accept that that's what's happening.
So, but your
Oh, we
acceptance is your acceptance is conditional on your karma.
I think we talked about this before,
Yes,
Samantha, of
we-
like it's a different meaning of conditionality. Those they're again, it's like these two words that are the same word, but really they're pointing at different things. When we say that all phenomena is conditioned, it's true. Like equanimity is conditioned, metta is conditioned. These are not the only thing that's not conditioned is nibbana, right? Nirvana, nibbana. It is the one. It is like the one element of the universe that is called the unconditioned. And so there, nothing arises, nothing passes, nothing is born, nothing dies. It's different. Everything else, all sight, sound, smells, taste, has conditioned because of something that arises before it, right? That it's we're born because of this. Like everything is happens because something else just happened before it that leads to that to happen. So that's what conditionality means in the biggest sense of like the Dharma and Buddhism and Paticca when you say something like unconditional love or unconditional acceptance, it's not referring to that. It's not saying that it is not nothing or it is not based on the arising, the fact of mind and body, forming, and that the metta still is, of course, a conditioned sankhara. It's still a phenomena, a sankhara, but that the rising of that particular formation of love is not dependent on something being kind or pretty or taste good or whatever, right? It's like that we don't just love this food because it's the food we have a preference for. We don't just love this person because they behave in a way that, right? This idea of love that is not dependent upon behavior or based on conditions, the typical conditions. It just means that we have a capacity to care for ourselves and each other and other beings, to care for the world, not just based on our preferences. That's what that phrase means. It doesn't mean that love is arising outside of conditioned phenomena. So it really isn't pointing to the same thing at all. It's just trying to say that you've broken out of the habit of only loving things that you prefer, right? So it's not conditioned in the normal habitual way when we say, or unconditional acceptance, that it's like we accept the truth of things not just based on our preference. We're not just resisting things because we don't like them or grabbing onto the things we like. Unconditional acceptance is that sense of where we accept the truth of whatever arises and passes. It's not trying to say that it's not a sankhara. It's not a formation based on a past condition. So does that make sense of like a distinction between those two ways of using that same word? Yeah. So yeah, they're just not. It's two ways of using the same word that really are not pointing to the same thing. I did want to. There was something else about what you were. I think there's like a lot of interesting directions to go with the first question around. Do we need to understand something in order to accept it? I just think that's like a very powerful question and
I don't
always
think
worth.
so. I mean, my experience is that it hasn't. I'm just wondering how it happens. That's
Yeah,
because,
that's just
right.
watching it and seeing how it happens.
Okay, watch more.
Yeah.
I know.
I think what I will say, what I wanted to say, what I want to say is just that there are ways of trying that we think about things a lot in order to try to understand them on that level, and we think that that is gonna what leads us to acceptance. You can think of like science or whatever, right? They're like, okay, we have proven this in a certain ways of measuring things, and therefore we understand them, and therefore we accept them as true, right? There's like the kind of scientific method is that sort of intellectual measured rigor around knowledge, understanding in terms of accepting the truth of whatever reality or a virus or what have you. And that there's there's a place for that in our lives and in our world, right? And that sometimes you start to see the mind tends to just try to think about things a lot in order to accept it, but really it doesn't work, right? It's like the acceptance is never actually going to come through that
No.
process on some level. That we're going to rationalize it as much as we can, but ultimately the acceptance has to happen on a less intellectual level, right? On the level of the heart, of the mind, in a sort of different way. And just last, I'll say that this is an important thing with the seven factors of awakening. There's, equanimity, but also there's investigation. And sometimes we just want to be equanimous. We just want to accept. We just want to accept things as they are. But for the deepest equanimity, we still need investigation. We need to actually fathom reality. We need to understand it, not intellectually, but in this experience that we're talking about of like watching this happen over and over again. How does this process unfold? And trying to see it from the inside more and more, that it that deeper acceptance actually happens, that equanimity arises. And so if you have tried to just focus on equanimity without actually doing the Vipassana, which is the investigation, then there's no way to get to that deeper equanimity. So there is like a contradiction in this in some ways, a paradox.
I would like to add one, which is
Mm-hmm.
you can't make acceptance happen, right? And so what is it that makes for acceptance to happen? It's like if we know that it's fear that's afraid. It's not I am afraid. We don't make fear happen. Fear, it's fear that's afraid. It's happiness that's happy. It's not personal. And it's equanimity that makes acceptance happen. It's not a mystery. It's equanimity that makes equanimity happen. But you can't make it happen.
I that I know. And that's what I'm referring to. That only happens in practice. It's that deep, and I just don't know how it happens. It's just like lightning flash, and it's there, and I see it. I just don't know how it got there.
Thankfully. Otherwise, we'd try to control it like everything else.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, it's cool because you don't know in detail, but you do know in general. Like it happens in practice, and it doesn't happen elsewhere. And so there's definitely something about it, and yet there's that moment of what's actually happening in a moment of insight that is mysterious and is worthy of that. It's probably better, as Michelle said, that it stays mysterious.
For sure.
Thanks, Samantha. Actually, so Amy had a question. Amy, do you want me to read it or do you want to just kind of ask it again?
Oh, you can read it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay. So she's saying I practiced a lot a few years ago, but not recently. Uh, may I know how I can put my mind back to the main mind reading? I don't know if I'm reading that right. There were lots of thoughts coming during the meditation, but it was difficult to be mindful and get over those thoughts. Um, yeah. Anything you want to add to that, or do you? All
I
right.
think
That pretty much, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I think Michelle definitely will also have.
You want,
Michelle, do you want to start? Do you
uh,
want me to
um,
start?
well, it kind of relates to the other question that just happened, in that the nose smells, the eyes see, the ears hear, the mind thinks. And so there's a level of acceptance of that is unbelievably vast. Like it's so vast. The level to which we do not like that thinking is happening so quickly. It's and it has such power over us. The vastness of that, the amount of practice that it takes to really know how to work with this. It takes practice. So if you haven't been practicing for a while, that can contribute to this, because it's that learning over and over again that it's helpful to anchor the attention and to keep developing that ability to be with the bottom of your feet right now. Be with the sensations in your hands right now. Be aware of hearing, doing anything but spending time in thinking. Right. And even if 1,000 thoughts happen in 5 minutes, you notice it and you anchor away from it. You notice it, you anchor away from it. And the further away from the head, the better. So you're going, you see it, you go down. You see it, you go down. You see it, you go down. That's years of it, years of it, years of it. Because you have to get that space. You have to get enough space. The witness, the observer, all of that, it takes this incredible patience and trust that you're dropping out of the head. And all of our training, I should be careful there. Most of our training is to not do that. Most of our training is to trust our thought and to trust our thought and to not do this. And so when Jesse mentioned investigation, that second factor of enlightenment, that's critical here because you can drop down to your hands, but if you're not interested in them, then you're going to bounce right back up into the next thought because it's much more entertaining to be involved in thought than to go through the process of the boredom. The boredom is the ticket. The boredom is the route here. It's the path because the ability to go, for example, bring the attention to the hands and to let yourself be bored with it for a while until the attention is as refined as what's appearing. This is the real key. It's like, it's learning how to, whatever it is, and you pick, Amy, pick the sense store that's the most interesting to you. It could be sound, could be breath, it could be body sensations, but you try to cultivate one sense store that has the most interest to you, that's real, that's not based on conditional thought, right? That's my arm, that's my foot, that you have to have that patience to keep, we call it dropping into what exactly is there, and what exactly is there is ephemeral. It's fleeting. And so you try to do that for a few seconds, right? And then maybe a thought grabs you. And a lot of this is having the patience with this process rather than aversion to thinking, because thinking is happening all the time. And so I can assure you, if you do this with some patience, and this doesn't mean just sitting, it means walking, it means like eating, it means, you just do the best you can. You take your time with this. If you try too hard, it can backfire. If you don't try enough, you lose it. I had one other thing to say about it, but I'm not sure. Yeah. You can't make a problem out of thinking. It's just not going to work. Thinking will win. When you feel defeated, it's because it's aversion to the thinking, thinking isn't the problem. It's more that we just get sucked in and sucked in and sucked in. And it takes that kind of gradual patience of getting enough space to see it clearly. It's the most fleeting, ephemeral, often wacky of all. And sometimes very helpful. Sometimes thought is very helpful. That's my short answer.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I think I would just add that eventually, or at times, the mind can just observe thinking also. That ultimately, this is all meant to say that all of these phenomena have the same nature, whether it's hearing or thinking or the body, of being based on conditions and arising and passing out of our control. If we could control it, we would, and we can't. And so this is like, if there was this solid self that was present every moment that could just keep doing it, it would. But clearly you can see this sense of me is always changing and that there's this movement to it. It's just that, as Michelle is describing, it's the mind is generally it's like just the hardest thing to actually just observe because we're so identified with it being us. It's happening so quickly. I think, Michelle, you're pointing out that it tends to make us feel like that's the most important thing. Whatever it wants to think about is like way more important than your breath or anything else. So that sense of that it's the priority, it's very hard to just observe that from the outside. And so we train with the body, we train with sound, but that ultimately we can observe the mind. We watch, and maybe it's not always thinking, right? We notice, emotion. Sometimes if your thoughts are very repetitive, it can be helpful to say, it's like, is there an emotion underneath it that you're not quite seeing, an stress, a worry, a wanting, whatever. Sometimes that helps the mind quiet because you're listening to it. But again, it's like if we think of it as a problem, yeah, it's going to feel very defeating versus like, okay, there's this constant sort of chatter there in the background and we can bring other things to the foreground sometimes. Yeah. Great question.
Yeah, I think we all need a pep talk to listen, to be interested in our bodies. Honestly, it's just culturally, we're just like, or maybe it's human, but just that sense that the thoughts are much more important, and they just are not. They just are not. And then when people get old and they have a hard time with their body dying, it's because there has been no interest in what it really is. If you see it for what it is, it's just earth, air, and fire, moment to moment, coming and going by itself. And it's not that I don't mean that we don't get attached to our body, because it's with us, we're responsible for our body, but it's like the level to which it's hard to get interested in our body as it gets old. I recommend doing it now, Amy, while you can. Yeah.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
did practice for almost 3 years when I was in grad school, and this moment, and I received the link, and I really appreciate that was most of my valuable time I was spending during 3 years. Appreciate it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks. Kristen, do you have a question?
Hi, Kristen.
Oh, good to see you.
Uh,
Sorry, I have COVID.
oh, you have or had?
I have it. I'm in the
Oh
midst.
boy.
I've had a question for some time that I've been reluctant to ask because it involves politics. But it seems to me an important question. I couldn't bring myself to watch the debates, but I watched the analysis afterwards. And I saw myself experience such a sense of exhilaration and thrill and a kind of schadenfreude when I saw, and what happened. And then as I continued, I recognized that wasn't a terribly wholesome response, and I was feeling very uncomfortable, and actually did feel some compassion for the candidate who was being deeply humiliated on a global scale. And then I've just been wondering what would be a wholesome response? Like when you know that like I'm not naive, like with discernment, I know that how to put it, that there's a clear and present danger. So it's like I'm not neutral by any means. And yet I saw the the unskillfulness of my initial reactivity. And as you know, I have practiced with compassion and metta during the previous presidency, primarily really for my own good. So yeah, it's just like I'm not so much wondering what's wholesome in terms of what could have been done differently in the debate, but what, with my own reactivity.
Jesse, I don't know if you want to go first, but I have an initial response, but it's not super considered, but I can go if you.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure I know we both.
Yeah. How I like to work with this kind of stuff is in myself and is dissect it a little bit in terms of if there's a kind of elation, like I also didn't watch the debates, but I certainly noticed a lot of people's reactions afterwards, and there were so, and I read a lot. I don't like to hear it, but I feel that if there was a kind of wincing, like a wincing around a kind of joy, what one needs to do is like in those moments, to, to pick a Brahma Vihara to do for a while for yourself that would be the most helpful. So for example, equanimity, accepting that you had that response would be the most wholesome response I could recommend, because it would cut into any sense that it was wrong or bad to have that response versus that was just a natural response that happened. Of course, but you don't want to land there. It's a moment to moment process where it can be like, well, of course, I feel this way. It's been a long haul. And then accept that you had the response. Do you see that will just balance it. That'll ground it. It'll balance it. Unless you can't accept that you had that response, because then if you can't accept that you had the response, because it's not you, it's not personal. You just had a moment or moments of elation. You don't have to believe you don't have to identify with that as being you or I or mine. That's always the issue, right? If you believe that it is you, and it's like it's like a reaction, a response that happened, and then you recover with the Brahma Vihara and of course the mindfulness. And then if you can't recover from it, you go to compassion for yourself. So you don't stay with the initial response. That's gone. It's like a process of working with the response.
And I think that was what I was doing, because I recognized it as as an unwholesome
Right.
response, but I wasn't down on myself for having it. There was like an uncomfortableness.
Well, I think that can
Um,
be good though. I mean,
yeah,
the uncomfortableness is actually, there's a friend of mine that lives in Honolulu, an old student that has that kind of extreme, in a good way, conscience, right? Like it's a conscience that's saying, actually, this doesn't feel, this is like being happy at someone's expense, that it isn't necessary, right? It's like become about me, not the situation, where it's like it's glorifying someone's suffering per se. It's not, it's really, I think it's really just that uncomfortableness is a good thing.
well, I think it is
Yeah.
too, because it helped me to recognize um, the unskillfulness. And I didn't even think of switching to compassion for myself. I mean, I did kind of naturally switch to compassion for the candidate.
Well, I think everybody needed to be doing compassion for themselves, watching that, or like almost moment to moment now. I mean, this is like requiring so much compassion for ourselves. That's how, I mean, that's like, yeah, yeah. And I think you've worked so hard, knowing you've worked so hard at practicing compassion in this context for years now, that maybe you forgot to do yourself.
Yeah, I think I did. Um, I was also thinking, I mean, it was hard for me to imagine watching that with equanimity. I mean, I guess that's the goal, right?
I
To
didn't
me.
even try. I just thought I'd end up smoking cigarettes, and I've never smoked cigarettes in my life. Like I just thought, why put myself through this? Like I don't see the point. I can learn everything I need to after, and it's just that the sixth sense doors, it's like an assault, it was like the watching a gladiator, the gladiators in Rome. I don't see the point. But
Right.
that's just me. I know a lot of people think I should have watched it.
Yeah, like I said, I didn't watch the actual debate, but I watched
Right.
pieces. But even that, I probably just should have read about it.
It was better reading that I could say. But when people ask me if I watched it, I wanted to lie, because like some people really like look at me like I'm just like the worst person in the world. And it's like, it's like I just see it like going into the Colosseum in Rome and watching a bloodbath. No thanks. I don't, it's just, but a lot of people, um, there are some people that are undecided and really needed to watch it to help decide. That is not my problem. So I think that again, but everybody's very, I think with all these things, it's like we're very individual. It's different for all of us. Some people watched it for a little while. Yeah, right. And, it's just everyone's perspective. But I do think that what's important of what you said is that sense of, I mean, I think not anticipating having some unwholesome moments in a debate, or watching it afterwards, rather than thinking like, isn't it interesting to watch the mind, right? Watch the heart and mind, and then practicing the compassion, or it's a practice. I'll say one more thing about it, and this is going to sound more basic, but way back when I was on staff at IMS, the group of us would like go to the airport to watch our mind, or we'd go to this big department store that was unpleasant mostly, to watch our mind. And I feel like that was a great training for me, in that um, that's just like, okay, I'm going to read about the debate and watch my mind, right? And so then it's not like you have to feel that it's, again, wherever you've done a lot of practice, like for you, Christian, you've done a lot of practice for the compassion outwardly in these situations. So maybe where you're needing the practice is more for yourself in those situations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think I do want to add a little, I guess 3 things. One is that paradox that's important to live in and kind of be confused about, of these phenomena are conditioned in our lives, right? We are conditioned through our everything that has happened up to this point to have a preference, right? To want this side to win versus that side to win, to some part of us to not be compassionate for other people's suffering, to whatever, to rejoice in one person winning or another person losing, or whatever it is, whatever unwholesome things that we might feel. It's like there's a lot of conditioning that has gone into developing that in all of us, in all of humans, right? And so that sense of it's not us, is there's something important to recognize, of like, these are conditioned behaviors of the heart, mind, and responses, and that these things will happen out of our control to some degree, right? These things will arise, and that there is this, like, kind of that paradox of, like, these unconscious, these subtly conscious, these very difficult things to kind of keep so attentive in the moment will arise. But then when it does arise, then suddenly there is personal responsibility, right? There is the sense of, actually, what we then do with that is a moral responsibility that we have. And so this, what you're describing as like that realm of hiri and ottappa, of, moral shame, moral dread, that are considered wholesome, that are considered healthy, of like, actually, I understand why this would be the case, but also I don't want to be perpetuating something into the future in my own life or into the world, and that we take responsibility sort of from that moment forward, right, of what we do when something like this arises. So I do think there's just something important to acknowledge about, it's like everything is rushing at us and in from within us so quickly and so powerfully that we're not sort of just controlling it all. Part of it is to see this and to understand it and accept this as part of humanity. And this is partly how we come to understand other people as well, and what's happening in our society and why. That we're not outside of that, that we're not somehow more aloof to experiencing these things. That's important, right? To be humble in that way and to take responsibility for it in a way that we hold as like a value, I think I do. It's that just 2 other things. Of, like, one is, where do we where do we get invested in the winner and the loser, right? And so we're going to have a rationale for like, well, this one feels important, this particular competition. And I'm definitely, I would agree that it's important, right? And there is also something more basic happening in the human heart and the human mind. And I think the sports thing is important. It's like I never got into sports. I was never been a big sports fan, but it's not just always because I don't think it's important. It often has been when I watch like a sports match with other people who are into it. As soon as I start to care about the winner or the loser, right? Because it's like, oh, well, that is my home team, or I have sympathy for this person and not this other person. It's extremely painful. Like it is a torturous experience to watch sports if you care. And so that wisdom of not watching the debate or not watching sports, not because you think it's irrelevant or because it's dumb or because it's not important, but because you actually get that it's an exhausting emotional experience, that there's a wisdom in that, and that's important to sort of see that you did that, right? You kind of protected yourself from what you would have known was going to be the sort of most volatile aspect of it, and then you tried to you still wanted to know what happened and get a kind of a feed into it, and it still brought up some of those things, but it sounds like more in a way that it was like, oh, one thing arose, one thing was and that you could kind of process it in a way that's manageable, that's very skillful. I also just I think there's something else about the world and not conflating what we're doing with how we might expect things to work in the world. It's okay to be confused or ambivalent or uncertain about how we feel about having a preference. It's like from how many years into the military coup in Burma are we? And I stay pretty in tune to what's happening, right? To what has become just this like incredibly sprawled out civil war across the country. And that ambivalence I have around I certainly think the military dictatorship should fall, right? I feel like I certainly believe that a democratic, multi-ethnic system that is like been sort of generally vaguely defined as a possibility there would be better, and that I don't expect all of the people across the country to just like submit to the authority of these, brutal military guys. And the reality is that the civil disobedience movement there, that was like so much integrity and really beautiful and nonviolent, it didn't work, and it wasn't enough to stop anything. And that ultimately many people felt like they had to have an armed resistance to the military government, and that is the only thing keeping the government from kind of solidifying its control. And that there are like in the last 9 months, last year or so, I mean there is like this real sense that the central government may not win, right? That there is a lot of power in a lot of these different kind of armed militias. And so this like question of this very powerful and painful question of like, what do I want? What do I want? I mean, it's not even like of course that's the most like irrelevant question on one hand in the world, but there is that sense of like, what does it mean to be invested in an outcome of a war, being on one side or another, where it like certainly means like lots of violence, lots of death, lots of mayhem and chaos, and like and certainly in this case, and probably in most cases in our world, not a clear sense of like when the winners win, how good are things really going to be, really, you know? And it's like even if the people you want to have win-win, what really happens then is like not generally like a very clear road. So I think the sort of ambivalence and ambiguity around these questions is really powerful and really important right now, and that we take our like that quality of like moral responsibility of like, well, however we manage it, like we're not going to be involved in like supporting weapons and guns, right? We're going to help do things that are around education and refugees and things like that. You know, you have these sort of like places of where the comma, where you take responsibility for the comma that we are moving forward. And that sense of the world is complicated, and you understand why why things get so extreme on so many ways, in terms of behavior, in terms of view, in terms of perspective, and the poignancy of that, you know, the painfulness of like rooting for a side in any kind of conflict like that is horrible, because it always means like killing, right? And that there's ways of rationalizing it, there's ways of, you know, whatever, but there is still that gravity to it. And it is very hard to disentangle caring from an attachment to a certain kind of outcome or an idea or whatever, a philosophy, or, you know, of how people should go about securing their lives or protecting their dignity, or, you know, stabilizing their societies, what it might be. So it's you know, and of course there's many conflicts right now happening in the world that we all are so evocative for so many of us, in terms of where we have natural sympathy, where we have ideological sympathy, and how much just leads to more violence and more killing and more mayhem, and where is there winning? Like, does winning even exist in that level? And yet the world is as it is, you know. I think it's there's a value in being uncertain, you know, and humble about what it is honestly it brings up for us, what we honestly feel, you know, sympathy for, or longing for, or wanting, or and then the humility of humbleness of just recognizing how hard it is as a way forward for any humans, any group of people, you know, trying to just like live life and raise families and feed themselves and work and, you know, appreciate life. It's how hard that is. So I know it's a little rambling, but I just, your experience of that like moment of uncertainty, of like the moral weight of what you're feeling and your response, is very beautiful and really important. And that it also isn't something that has to, we're living in a time where there's some value of living in a non-resolution of that at some point, right? That if we're just always trying to resolve it, that sometimes we're not as connected to the complexity of these things, and that there's something important about maintaining that connection, you know.
Thank you.
Mm.
I hope you feel better, Kristen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mm.
Mm. Thanks, Kristen.
Mm.
I have a technical question. Um, I've noticed recently that sometimes Michelle sounds like she's lisping. And that's in, I don't know, that's like I don't know if that's my headphones, but I know she's not lisping. And I want to know if other people hear that. And if it's not, if I sound like that also, or is it just Michelle? And because I want to be able to attend to it one way or another. Maybe it's just my computer, maybe it's hers, maybe it's the internet. Does anyone else hear that? Kat, you do.
Huh.
Julia doesn't. Others no. Okay. Huh. No.
Just one.
Just me and maybe Kat.
Wait a minute. Nicole's wrote something in.
Oh,
I
I've
have to
noticed
look.
on Zoom before with others. Yeah. Okay. I just noticed it with your
Oh.
S's. Sometimes they turn into like a TH.
Michelle than with you, Jesse.
What's that?
I feel like it's more with Michelle than it is with you.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll explore it or not. But I'm glad it's not. Well, I should listen to the recordings and see if it's coming on the recordings. That would be one way.
You know, I've always loved listening to people who lisp, so maybe it's like okay. No, I do. I always feel like, wow, another one of those things.
I'm the only one hearing it.
Maybe
You and
it's my
Kat.
mic. Maybe it's my microphone.
I was thinking maybe it's the little fuzzy thing, but no one. Most folks don't seem to be hearing it, so I think it's not that. We'll keep exploring.
How about Sally sold seashells on the seashore? Did that sound lispy?
For me, it did.
It did? It sounded lispy, Sally? Oh.
Huh.
Oh, well, then it doesn't matter.
Let's see. All right, the mystery continues. And Rama, yes, Hiri and Ottava, which I think Kate put in there. Yes,
Kate,
thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
And a happy autumn equinox. We're here already. Yes, first day of autumn.
Take care, everyone.
Cheering us all on. Yeah, we need it.